Good evening, doctors. On behalf of Alchem, I take the privilege to welcome our all eminent panelists and speakers, and obviously the audience who has taken their time to attend this webinar. This is the third series of CritiQuest. The first two series was very successful, and those two series we did on the recent pandemic on COVID-19 and its impact and treatment. While we were planning the third series and we were talking with the faculties, the majority and some of the delegates, the clear opinion came that there are a lot of CMEs or webinars has been done on COVID. So let us come back to our own subject of interest, which is intensive care. So having said that, we have evaluated the request, and then we came back to our core strength area of intensive care. So today our webinar is basically based on the antimicrobial resistance and the treatment of one of the major elements. With that, I will hand over. I welcome all of you, and I wish a very successful and meaningful meeting. With that, I will hand over the forum to our medical department, our General Manager, Medical Department, Mr. Dr. Chirag Teli. Dr. Chirag, you can introduce Chairperson.
Thank you, Sandeep. Very good evening to all on the behalf of Alchem Hospital team. As per one recently published report, antimicrobial resistance seems to have emerged as a major threat, and it is estimated to cause 10 million deaths annually by 2050. India as a country carries one of the largest burden of drug-resistant pathogens worldwide. As we all know, NDM1, which was reported in 2008 and rapidly spread across the world in many countries, and it was named after India's capital. On that note, ICMR has set strategic priorities under 2017 National Action Plan to fight against AMR. With this, it is also required to have very good antibiotic in our armamentarium as clinicians to fight against these bugs efficiently, and what we may name as superbugs antibiotic. The lack of newer antibiotics is also a worldwide problem, and India is also a part of it as a big challenge. In India, we have recently made available Arbicacin as aminoglycoside antibiotic from House of Alchem. And also we feel that as a responsible organization to take responsibility to discuss in the forum amongst you all. And I'm very privileged to discuss this objectives of AMR and available newer antibiotics. I'm very privileged to introduce our chairperson of today's session, Dr. Ranveer Tyagi, who is Vice President ISCCM, Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, and Director of Department of Anesthesia and Critical Care Medicine, Synergy Hospital, Agra. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chirag, for your kind introduction, and heartily namaskar to all of you. Good evening. And now I introduce excellent speaker, Dr. Pradeep Rangappa. He is the senior critical care consultant and physician in Colombo Hospital, Bangalore. He is the vice president also ISCCM, and he is one of the leader in Karnataka to advisory board in the Karnataka government regarding COVID-19. So now I welcome to Dr. Pradeep Rangappa. He is delivering a talk on antimicrobial resistance. Welcome, Pradeep.
So you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks Ranveer for a very kind introduction. So Ranveer is my very good friend, so he's like my brother. So thanks so much for the kind introduction. And it's nice to talk on a topic other than COVID, because until now I've been only speaking on COVID. So it is a bit of a change for me to speak on this new topic. Not a new topic, the old topic, but which we have not been spoken around for a long time. So I'll just share the screen. So hope the screen is out, Vinay.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so the topic I'll be covering is antimicrobial resistance in India. So this is just a preamble. It's just a 15 minutes talk on the overview as how we are in India with regards to antimicrobial resistance. So the topics that I would be covering is global AMR. So what is the global burden of antimicrobial resistance, and what is the burden in India, and what has changed in last 5 years in India, and what have been the global efforts to counter this antimicrobial resistance, and is India keeping in pace with the global moves in curtailing this antimicrobial resistance? So this is the topics that I will be covering. So if you look at the data that has been published, which was taken notice by WHO in 2014, so the AMR, if you look, antimicrobial resistance, you had around 700,000 people worldwide globally. These are the reported ones. So if you take unreported, I'm sure the number will be much higher. And if you look at the leading causes of disease burden, it was the cancer, followed by diabetes, followed by road traffic accidents and diarrheal. So, the projections in the rate antimicrobial resistance is increasing. So in 2050, the estimated numbers is close to 10 million. So which would exceed the cancer if there is a indiscriminate use of these antibiotics, and if the antimicrobial resistance continue to increase the way it has been. And what that means, what that translates to the human burden is there can be around 10 million deaths every year, and the GDP can go down to 2 to 3.5%, which amounts to 100 trillion US dollars. So these are the projections that WHO has put in place, that this is the disease burden of antimicrobial resistance. So if you look at the countries which have been at the forefront of antimicrobial resistance, the Asia has been at the forefront, and 4.73 million is the disease burden that is currently there with the antimicrobial resistance issue, followed by Africa, which is 4.15 million, followed by Latin America, and then followed by North America and Europe. So which means the antimicrobial resistance has literally not spared any continent. Literally all continents are there, and Asia is at the forefront, which is a huge worry for a country like India and China. So India does remain as a hotbed for antimicrobial resistance, because our whole problem with antimicrobial resistance, which really raised the antenna for the global people or the WHO, was in 2006, when the New Delhi metallo-beta-lactamase was first identified in 2006. And this was followed by recognition of these severe resistant bugs in China in 2008. And this was followed by reports in Europe, in UK. This was following the Gulf War, and then it spread to USA. So you would see, like any other disease burden, this antimicrobial resistance is no longer a burden confined to only our country. Although our country is at the forefront for all bad reasons, but it has spread globally, and that's where the WHO has taken note and has come out with strict guidelines as to how the steps have to be taken to curtail and mitigate this antimicrobial resistance. And when you look at the antibiotic consumption, the high-end antibiotics, if you look at the carbapenems, India sort of leads the list, I mean, just behind Pakistan and Egypt. So if you look, our consumption of these high-end antibiotics is very high in India. And so if you look at this, again, India is followed by China, followed by USA when it comes to total antibiotic consumption, which is not a great thing for us to take pride in, because India uses more antibiotics and India uses more high-end antibiotics, which is very alarming with regards to the emergence of antimicrobial resistance that prevails in this part of the world. So now the question is, would there be a problem if this resistance continues to increase the way there is? Yes, the problem is there, but are there any solutions? Solutions is only the newer antibiotics. So because of these newer bugs that have come in, so there is a lot of new antibiotics that are in the pipeline. And if you look at the WHO report, which took notice of this emerging antimicrobial resistance, they divided the organisms into priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. So they put Acinetobacter in priority 1. They've identified 3 groups of organisms. So Acinetobacter, which is very unique to our country and to Asia, is put as number 1, followed by Pseudomonas, and followed by Enterobacteriaceae species, which includes Klebsiella and ESBL producing organisms. So these 3 are the notorious bugs which we deal with day in and day out when we talk about multi-drug resistance. And these are the bugs which has put as priority 1, followed by priority 2, where you have other bugs like Enterococcus faecium and gram-positive and Helicobacter and other species. So what we'll be focusing is when we talk about AMR or antimicrobial resistance, these are the 3 distinct group of organisms that we would be really looking at in trying to address, and the tools to really mitigate the resistance in these organisms. So this was a formal report that was submitted, and it made a lot of news during that time. So the WHO has put 10 verticals as to how to tackle antimicrobial resistance. So, or the 10 postulates or 10 hypotheses. So first and most important is the public awareness. And the second thing which it identified, which is of relevance to India, is increased usage of these antibiotics in the farms, like in poultry or any livestock farms. The antibiotics are used in these poultry and in these livestock. And this has to be mitigated because this also contributes significantly to antimicrobial resistance. And strengthening and enhancing the surveillance is the third aspect that WHO has recognized. And investing in the human capital to tackle this antimicrobial resistance and setting up a global innovation fund is another aspect that they have identified. And sixth most important thing is the sanitation and hygiene, which I'm sure now everyone is geared up to with this COVID. So sanitation and hygiene is part of any of the healthcare tools that we need to incorporate to mitigate the resistance. Vaccines, rapid diagnostics, yes, molecular diagnostics is the way to go so that we get a quick answers about the prevailing resistance pattern, and the newer drugs and international coalition. So these are the 10 points that WHO has put in place that every country should adopt and strengthen these areas to tackle the antimicrobial resistance. So these are the 10 areas which they have identified, which is very good, very comprehensive, and very inclusive of all the aspects which contribute to antimicrobial resistance. So what is the future pipeline for the drugs? So if you see, the newer drugs is slowly dwindling. So there aren't really new drugs that are coming. If you look at around 3 decades before, so there were a lot of drugs coming out. But if you look at 2008 to 12, the number of newer antibiotics that have come is really dwindling. But there is some hope. So what has India done? So whatever we have spoken until now is WHO sort of a guidelines or WHO's tasks. But India in 2016, taking cognizance of the WHO's action, has come out with its own antimicrobial guidelines. And they came up with something called National Action Plan to combat antimicrobial resistance. So the Ministry of Health was involved, and they have put up their own blueprint to see how we can tackle this antimicrobial resistance in India. So what Government of India recommended is, they did emphasize that we need to prevent antibiotic misuse by the healthcare community, which includes doctors and all the doctors dealing with antibiotics, and prevent antibiotic misuse even by the patients. So off-the-shelf usage of antibiotics has to be curtailed, and in-hospital misuse of antibiotics has to be curtailed. So which means for the first time ever in India, government has put up a national action plan with these 3 domains, identifying these are the problem areas which we need to address. And National Action Plan, the duration setup was between 2017 to 21. It's almost like a 5-year plan where they have really looked at curtailing antimicrobial resistance in the hospital setting by having good stewardship program and taking care of our ecological health. And Government of India also emphasizes the minimizing the use of these antibiotics or mitigating the use in the livestock, and continued health education. So these are the 4 areas Government of India has put its effort, and they are hoping that with these practices, it would alter the prescription practices and consumer behavior, and enhanced infection control strategies or cascading of the infection control strategies, and antimicrobial surveillance. Strengthening the antimicrobial surveillance is what this government report emphasized. And it does emphasize on tackling concerns on antibiotic misuse in the livestock farms and within the hospital. And this whole National Action Plan came out with a blueprint, and this happened under Dr. J.P. Nadda. So this was a beautiful document in line or aligning with the sentiment of WHO that they put in place to tackle antimicrobial resistance in India. And this was the formal document they came out. And the good thing about Indian government is they did involve the pharmaceutical producers of India. So the organizers of pharmaceutical producers of India were also a party to this document, and they supported this public health campaign, and all the pharmaceutical industry, they aligned to the fact that they would take measures to limit overuse of antibiotic and prevent the abuse of antibiotics and mitigate its usage. So which means to say that partnering with the healthcare, partnering with the medical industry was something which was found to be important, and this happened, which was a good thing. So, so when you look at the antimicrobial resistance burden, so this was the, if you look at the global data which came a few years back, gram negative still remains the problem area in our Asia, but it is the gram, if you look at the Western data, it is the gram positive which is more of a burden. 52.1% of their infections were gram positive, followed by 37 point. But this number is changing. This was a reference from 2003, but these numbers are changing. If you look at the Indian data, this is my hospital data. The gram negative burden is 76.92% and gram positive is 23.06. And our MRSA burden in my hospital was 20.83. It's just to give you a bit of a preamble to see where our disease burden in India is. So we have more of gram negative issue. So I will just conclude with this summary. So the key thing is each one needs to have an autonomy, or we need to be motivated or driven to tackle this antimicrobial resistance. So it really comes down to each individual's exercise of their autonomy to tackle this pandemic. And the key thing is all of us are aware about the prevalence of antimicrobial resistance. We have it in mind, but applying that at the ground level is what is needed. And we need to balance between the patient care and our ecological perspective. What that means is that just because we want to save a life, we cannot throw indiscriminately all the antibiotics. The typical example is the transplant setting, where typically if you have a transplant, you have, many a times rationalization of antibiotics not necessarily may happen to the extent we would love to see. So that is where we need to balance out, because you throw all the antibiotics at a sick patient with an intent to save, you may induce resistance in your ecology. So that's where you need to strike a balance. And higher antibiotic restrictive prescription policy is a way to go. It is difficult. In our hospital, we have a restrictive policy where we do not dispense high-end antibiotics without justifying its usage with whatever substantiation, with cultures or with clinical spectrum. So it is important. We need to have antibiotic prescription restriction in every institute. And putting this SOP is difficult, but we need to head that way to curtail antimicrobial resistance. The key thing is sustained effort is the way to go. So we need to not slacken the whole, the measures. So the efforts have to be sustained, relentless and resilient in measure. And antibiotic stewardship program is the way to curtail antimicrobial resistance. And this should align with the thought process of the ID physicians that are involved in putting up these antibiotic stewardship programs. So for the antimicrobial stewardship program, the key thing is having innovative ideas, having a good stewardship team or an infection control team, and it is all about teamwork. So these are the entities or the elements that you would need to make this antibiotic stewardship program successful. So every ounce counts. So we have to start somewhere, but we have to think big in putting in all these measures to curtail antimicrobial resistance. So thank you very much. So I would end my talk here, and I will hand over to Ranveer to take the proceeding further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pradeep, for nice talk in very short time. This topic is very vast. So now we invite for question answer, or a question answer which will be later on. Sandeep?
Yeah, I believe later on we will have a Q&A after this case presentations completely.
Okay. So those who want to ask question, please keep your question ready. So we will keep the question answer session later on. Thank you very much, Pradeep, once again. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Chirag. Dr. Chirag?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Sandeep.
can you please introduce Dr. Akhilesh?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. It was as usual, very interesting session and very crisp way to take it, and beautifully with beautiful slides as well. With this point, I invite Dr. Akhilesh Sharma, who is the global president and the chief medical officer for Alchem Laboratories, and Dr. Akhilesh will talk about the topic on the albendazole the newer antibiotic on aminoglycoside class, a new antibiotic with the topic of new antibiotic under the hood. Over to you, Dr. Akhilesh.
A very warm welcome to all of you and to the elite panelists. First of all, let me thank you all for joining this highly engaging discussion. We believe that we would make it engaging. I know most and go through it quickly. So it's been a drug which has been used for quite some time in Japan when it was launched since 1990. It was available, and though it was discovered way back in 1972 and approved in India in 2019. And there's been a significant number of clinical studies and even real world evidences, post-marketing observational studies for right use of arbicacin. And the data further would speak about how the drug has still continued to perform well and remain stable despite its so long-term usage over these years, which combines about some of the antibiotic which would have been followed in the countries, as well as the strength which arbicacin brings along with. So the antibiotic stewardship, as what Dr. Rangabha was highlighting in his previous talk. So almost more than 250,000 patients have been treated in terms of in the clinical trials. The data is available on that. So quickly I'll go on to, it's like an aminoglycoside structure, but it's very stable, unlike the other aminoglycoside. It's a more advanced class in that, and stable to the various enzymes produced by the various bacteria. And it was not activated even by many of the other aminoglycoside inactivating enzymes, which inactivate the other aminoglycosides. And that is probably because of its different chemical structure, which does not happen with this enzyme, which otherwise would cleave the other aminoglycoside structures and make it completely inactive. So it's a more stable antibiotic, stable to against the other activating enzymes. It has bactericidal action, and like we all know, it works on the typical ribosomal subunits. Despite saying that it's a gram-positive drug, and that's what it has been used for, and where the data is also available for MRSA and enterococci, but it has also shown a good activity against certain gram-negative bacteria and very low MICs against E. coli, Pseudomonas, and Klebsiella. And it's been used in terms of its application for multi-resistant gram-negative infections, especially when it is combined with antibiotics, not only as a standalone. But primarily, its major usage has been in the gram-positive, especially the resistant pathogens. The most important part about arbicacin is that the bactericidal activity has been demonstrated at very low concentration, and you can see that it has a concentration-dependent bactericidal activity, and activity is much higher than even other drugs in the same class used for the MRSA organisms. That is your vancomycin, linezolid, quinaprestim, dalfrastim combinations, or linezolid. It also has demonstrated a good PAE, and the PAE actually has been shown to last longer with higher concentrations. In fact, once a day also has shown a good long-lasting PAE, and the PAE is almost around 3.9 hours, and it's got overall a good exposure if you compare it with vancomycin. It also has a good biofilm penetration, which makes it important activity as well at 1/4 of its MIC. And that's been another advantage with arbicacin. And these are the comparisons of its MIC values, where you could see it has one of the lowest MIC values against the MRSA, And even if we compare the gram-negative pathogens, it has a very low MIC values against Klebsiella, Moraxella, Pseudomonas aeruginosa as well, and H. influenzae. So overall, these are the advantages, especially when you decide to use it in combination where you're anticipating a gram-negative, as an empiric therapy when you would like to combine it with the other drugs like, say, aztreonam and other antibiotics. Overall, it's got excellent distribution in the respiratory tract and in lungs. Normally, it is about 30% in general. And the volume of distribution correlates the way it gets into the extracellular fluids and the other interstitial fluid or the synovial fluid. The distribution actually for the circulating wound site also has been found to be well above the MIC values for the staph aureus, and distribution in the wound exudates when they measured was found to be almost 46.2 to 55%, which is very, very higher than its other concentrations. So these are few of the clinical evidences against the MRSA, which have been compiled from the various clinical trials. As you can see in pneumonia, sepsis, and skin and soft tissues, and various other infections, mostly the pneumonia and sepsis and the STIs. So overall clinical efficacy in these trials have ranged to be up to 89%, and the efficacy in microbiological cure rate is up to around 83%. And in terms of its comparative studies with the glycopeptides, it has demonstrated non-inferiority to the other glycopeptides in terms of the clinical and microbiological efficacy overall when it was compared. But the most important thing in one of the outcome of this is the adverse reactions were significantly lower, and very few patients really dropped out, and it tolerated very well albicacin as compared to the other glycopeptides. And these are a few case studies which mention its promising use in additional infections, like in a case of MDR Pseudomonas putida, which was a metallo-beta-lactamase producing organism, and it showed that arbicacin had a very good efficacy when used along with levofloxacin in this case, and another case where it was used along with minocycline. It helped in the resolution of the subcutaneous and intramuscular MRSA abscess. So, as I said already, that it's got a good activity also against the gram-negative pathogens, and it's got a very potent activity against imipenem-resistant A. baumannii, and the MIC of arbicacin for E. coli is about 2 to 4-fold lower than that of the other aminoglycosides, especially amikacin and gentamicin. And it was found to be almost from 2, 4, and 16-fold more potent than amikacin against various ESBL producing E. coli, if we compare it against the other antibiotics, right from amikacin, gentamicin, and tobramycin. So it has other activities, the ESBL producing Klebsiella pneumoniae, and also most potent activity against carbapenemase producing K. pneumonia. So arbicacin and tobramycin, in fact, in one of the assessment, they showed that it was found to be a more potent aminoglycoside when tested against A. baumannii and the Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So it's been used in combinations with other antibiotics, like with aztreonam. It was found to treat effectively patients with acute myelogenous leukemia with multi-drug resistant aeruginosa bacteremia. And in another study, it was combined with vancomycin or compared with rather vancomycin, teicoplanin, and it was found to be having a much more synergistic activity against the ampicillin sulbactam. And assessment of its in vitro MIC showed that against the different, more than almost 200 strains of Acinetobacter baumannii, isolate showed that the antibacterial effect of arbicacin was enhanced with arbicacin carbapenem combinations, especially the meropenem and imipenem when combined along with arbicacin. So what about its therapeutic monitoring, or when we talk about the nephrotox and the ototox potentials. So it's been found that at a high dose of about 5,000 milligram, there could be a risk of nephrotoxicity, especially based on the hydration status and the various characteristics, as you all know, with the aminoglycosides. Similarly with urbic acid, whereas the risk of nephrotoxicity is less when the dose is less than 5,000 milligram. In an experimental study, arbicacin was found to be less nephrotoxic as compared to vancomycin. And this was published way back in 1994. And it's also supposed that ototoxicity generally, as you know, occurs when the drug tends to get accumulated in the endolymph and the perilymph area in the inner ear. So in another study in 1986, it was found that it is less amic acid. So there's been an extensive data on arbicacin internationally, but I would like to talk about some of the most important data coming from India. So a phase 3 randomized study compared arbicacin with vancomycin, and it was 162 patient studies. In these patients, they were they had infections with MRSA, either having pneumonia or SSTI, and different SSTI like infected ulcers or deep abscesses. And both the groups were divided equally, and they received arbicacin 200 milligram once daily, and the other group received vancomycin 1000 milligram BID for 7 to 14 days. And the assessment was on the clinical and microbiological cure rate and the time to fever clearance. So overall, this is the cure rate across all the patient population, which is equivalent against vancomycin high dose, which was used in this case. And overall microbiological cure rates also were in the similar lines, with the p-values remaining the same. Coming to the patients showing wound healing, there's been an overlap, if you can, between vancomycin. So overall, proportion of patients showing wound healing was comparable in both the groups at each time point. And one very interesting thing which came out was the median fever clearance rate in these patients was less than 10 days, which was overall lower in the arbicacin group as compared to vancomycin. So perhaps looks like it has a faster impact on the bacterial load, and the defervescence seems to be much faster with arbicacin if you want to correlate with the kind of activity in vivo. So this is the study which is already published, and the data can be shared. And when it comes to therapeutic drug monitoring, it is recommended generally in patients receiving a very high dose, as I mentioned, especially in an intensive setting, patients who are maybe hemodynamically unstable or who have a very severe dehydration status. So once we really take care of that, it helps to ease out the treatment with arbicacin. And especially patients who may have a compromised renal function, or those with unstable renal activity, that is either deteriorating or changing renal status. And other cases where it needs to be monitored is the infants and the elderly population, especially the very high age group patients. The recommended trough concentrations and Cmax are normally in these cases to be less than 2 microgram per ml. So that's been the TDM required for arbicacin. And the treatment regimen, generally it's approved as once a day, 150 to 200 milligram once a day, generally given to patients in the form of IV injections, and diluted with either with 100 ml of 0.9% normal saline, and administered by IV infusion over a period of 30 minutes to 2 hours. And in pediatric patients, for preterm infants with a postnatal age of less than 28 days, it is 5 milligram per kg every 48 hours. And for preterm infants with a postnatal age more than 28 days, it is 5 milligram per kg every 24 hours. And for the term patients, term infants, it is 4 to 6 milligram per kg every 24 hours. So these are the different dosing regimen. If we take care of it, it would help you to manage your cases with a good tolerability profile. And this is in the renally impaired patients. It is proposed to be dosed as a priming dose of 200 milligram, and then a maintenance dose that is the half of the priming dose, say 100 mg, and a dosage interval of in clearance of 12 to 24 hours if the creat clearance is somewhere between 20 to 25 ml per minute, and the interval needs to be increased if the creat clearance is less than 20 ml per minute. So the interval would increase to 24 to 48 hours. And pharmacokinetics, already we have discussed about an extensive distribution, normally well tolerated, and some of these are some of the most of the common adverse reactions which are seen with other aminoglycosides as well. So in conclusion,
Dr. Achilles, you are not audible.
The voice has frozen, I think.
Yeah, I believe some internet issues at his place. Dr. Hemat, can you just give a call to him?
Yes, sir.
am I audible now, Sandeep?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are not
Audible.
you are audible now, but from the beginning of this slide, there was nothing. We could not hear anything.
Sorry, yeah, bandwidth issue. I
Yeah,
think.
if you can repeat, please.
Yeah. So overall, I would conclude that it's a broad spectrum antibiotic, though it's actually used for MRSA gram-positive infections. And when it comes to combining it with the other gram-negative antibiotic, it really has a very good synergistic activity, especially more potent antimicrobial against the MRSA as compared to the other anti-MRSA antibiotics, as the whole list is. And it's a stable antibiotic against most of the organisms which may be producing aminoglycoside inactivating enzymes. And it offers a concentration-dependent bactericidal activity and a prolonged post-antibiotic effect, which helps to rapidly decline the bacterial count and control the bacterial count. And it exhibits synergistic activity, as I said, against aztreonam, carbapenem, that is meropenem, and the other penams. Thus, it turns out to be a neotherapy. Overall, you have been using it, so many of you are experienced already, either as a monomicrobial for MRSA, and especially when it comes to managing a polymicrobial or as an empiric therapy when you would like to combine it with the other antimicrobial agent. So these are multiple publications. I'll not take you through that. So thank you for this, and thanks for hearing me out for this drug, albendazole. Maybe later on, if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akhilesh, to take us through albendazole clinical data and showing a silver line, if I would say, a new hope in the world of AMR, antimicrobial resistance. Not only for the gram-positive infection, but also a word of promise for a gram-negative infection. And as Dr. Pradeep has shared from WHO, the high-risk organisms like Acinetobacter, Baumannii, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and like that. So with that point, let us go to the next phase of the our session regarding the case study based presentation. And we have the case study on the pneumonia in the critical care, a real-time case based discussion, where we like to see that regarding the treatment strategies, what are the evidence and practical insights, identifying the hooks for choosing the empirical antibiotic. To begin with, at times we are required to choose the antibiotic empirically, and the scope of newer antibiotics, in particular the role of arbicacin. So for that we have moderator Dr. Shushruth Bandyopadhyay. He is the director of critical care, EMRI Hospital, Salt Lake. To present the case, this real-time case, we have to present it by Dr. Shrikant Shahasrabudhe, director from critical care medicine, Kamal Nayan Bajaj Hospital, Aurangabad. And we have the co-panelist, Dr. Ranveer Tyagi, vice president, ISCCM, and the director, Department of Anesthesia, Critical Care Medicine, Synergy Plus Hospital, Agra, and Dr. Pradeep Rangappa, consultant, intensive care physician, Columbia Asia Hospital, Bengaluru. Over to you, Dr. Shrikant. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So good evening, everyone. And there has been a little issue with my laptop, so I'm actually doing it with my cell, and I would request someone to just go on with the slides, please. Next. So we are in an era of COVID, and for a change, after so many webinars, we are here for a change, not discussing about COVID. And I would welcome my friends, Dr. Sushruth, Pradeep, as well as Dr. Ranveer. All of you, hi, all of you.
Hi.
And
Namaste.
so, namaste. And hope in the next 15 or 20 minutes, I would discuss a case and request comments from all of you as to how we go about the case. I hope it's interesting enough to keep you engaged. So let us start with a case. I had a 50-year-old male who was a smoker, alcoholic. He presented with fever and chills, cough and dyspnea, along with myalgia and arthralgias for about 5 days, and they were quite progressive symptoms, along with decreased urine and edema feet. Next. This was the presenting complaints, and there was a significant past history for this patient in the form of he had a congenital aortic stenosis due to a subaortic membrane. He also had diagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and a COPD with chronic atrial fibrillations. He had ascending aortic aneurysm with CV deficiency, for which he was operated, and along with that he had diverticulosis and gout. So he had his subaortic membrane resection, which was operated about at the age of when he was 10 years old. And as I said, he underwent aortic wall replacement with septal myomectomy when he was 45 years age. So about 5 years back from the date of presentation. The medications where he was on rivaroxaban, sotalol, eplerenone, furosemide, atorvastatin, potassium chloride, allopurinol, and ibuprofen. And he was taking tiotropium MDI and fluticasone MDI for his COPD. So this was his presenting X-ray, and as you could see, a gross pneumonia on the right side and a few patches on the left side, and we could get his CT. Next. Which shows bilateral opacities, and the left opacity along with the predominant right opacity with some filling kind of defects in the right-sided pneumonia. Next. So his relevant labs were on presentations. His total counts were 25,300, so clear-cut neutrophilic leukocytosis with a high INR of about 3.5, where he did not had any overt bleeding. His creatinine was 4.5 with urea of 99. His cardiac biomarkers revealed BNP of about 5,000, lactates of 4.5, and procalcitonin was very high, about more than 100. Next. So here I would like to just take a little, halt and maybe just invite some comments from our esteemed co-panelists as well as a moderator, whether what are what can be discussed about the recent treatment guidelines of community-acquired pneumonia, especially with such comorbidities, and what are the current evidences with the practical insights. So if anyone can take this question.
I'd rather put this question on to you. What are your practices in your locality as per your usual set of patients? What is your empiric therapy in a community acquired pneumonia?
So
what do you usually do? Let's forget the guidelines. What do you usually do?
Yeah. So usually what we come across is very straightforward community-acquired organisms like Streptococcus or Staphylococcus, which are most of the times non-MRSA, and the atypical organisms, especially the Chlamydia, Mycoplasma, or the Legionella. Although we don't check for all of these routinely, but of course, yes, Streptococcus pneumonia and MSSA would definitely be the considerations. But looking at the comorbidities which this patient clearly has in the form of COPD and the heart disease, we would definitely, we come across more often than not these days, even community-acquired gram-negative organisms which are drug-resistant. So Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, E. coli, these are also having, the presence in our setup these days, where we need to cover either of these depending on the patient case scenario.
Do you feel this patient has got COPD or just a chronic heart failure with MDI is given as a sort of comfort?
I'm sorry.
Drug to give them. Do you feel that the patient actually has got COPD or just the MDIs are being used just as a to buttress his heart failure treatment? I feel it's more likely to be a chronic heart failure patient.
Yeah, but then this patient had serial follow-ups with the chest physicians and with serial PFTs and with the serial treatment schedules with his chest physicians, who had prescribed him with long-term bronchodilators and steroid combination, which was mentioned. So this patient definitely had underlying COPD, which was the PFTs were consistent with that.
What does Dr. Tyagi say?
What about the basically BNP is very high, and
Yeah.
what about the PO2 AVG? Because only lactate is available. What about the AVG reports? Because sometimes, or first you send the culture of the sputum of this patient or no?
No. What happened was when he came, we just could go get his radiology done, and the moment he got shifted and he deteriorated, and we had to put him on non-invasive ventilation. So the sputum was not possible, but as you said, the ABG, which shows clear-cut hypoxia, which with compensatory respiratory acidosis. So in view of his respiratory distress, we had to put him on NIV, but we could not send his sputum. And I take BNP as as this patient already had a renal failure. Yeah. So I thought BNP, whether it really corresponds with the real BNP or it's a falsely high BNP in presence of renal failure.
And echo got a because
I'll talk about that. I have a echo report which after a few slides, which I will discuss. Anything else to comment, Pradeep?
Yeah, Shrikant, a very so interesting case. As Sushruth said, see, most of these cases when they come, they have a overlap of heart failure with a underlying infection. It's very hard to delineate which is an overriding issue. But obviously, you will have to cover for because he's in sepsis, because he has an organ dysfunction, life-threatening organ dysfunction in the form of acute kidney injury, and his lactates are high. So I would cover, as you rightly said, Shrikant, I would cover with piperacillin, because you said there is a worry about resistance pattern. So I would give a piperacillin tazobactam with maybe macrolide as well, azithromycin, pending the culture reports. That would be my initial start, and obviously I would resuscitate him because he's in a
Right.
lactates are pretty high.
Right.
So that would be
So,
my approach to at an outset, Srikanth.
what would be your comment on the high BNP in presence of creatinine of 4.5?
Yeah, so I wouldn't read too much into it at this point of time. But as I said, after having thrown in community covered antibiotic, I would optimize his heart failure definitely.
Right. Right.
Going by clinical cues that I get, Srikanth, which you would have
Right.
done, I would have,
Right. Right.
And starting antibiotic, send the sputum culture as well as the blood culture. And third
Yeah.
thing is you do ultrasound, lung ultrasound. Also, you have a CT, but sometimes you IVC and all these things. Echo, fluid
Yeah.
overload, you rule out all these things.
Right. So,
And
but if you see the scan films actually doesn't go consistent with fluid overload. They are more with a consolidation pattern rather than a fluid. I mean, that's what I thought when I saw the scan.
Yeah. Most of the left side. Right.
Can
It
I
was on
have
the
a
right
look at the? Can I have a look at the X-ray once more?
Yeah. Can you go back to the X-ray?
And the scan, does it show some cavitations?
Yes. The X-ray doesn't show the filling defects as I actually commented. And when we did the next please.
CT.
Yeah. So if you can see that there's so many kind of the filling kind of defects
bumps.
on the right side, which are not apparent on the X-ray. So and by and large, this CT goes more in favor of a consolidation rather than failure. But as you are correct, there is definitely an overlap of the three pathologies here, which we are saying is pneumonia, COPD, and heart failure.
Heart failures.
So ultimately, what antibiotic did you start him on?
Yeah. So can I just go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
So, on examination, this patient was conscious. Next slide. Yeah. But the patient was febrile with the BP, which was okay. With a respiratory rate of about 45, this patient was definitely looking fatigued. And as I said, we took him straight away on NIV. Somehow we got his scan done before he came to the ICU. And as Pradeep correctly said, we started him on clarithromycin with combination of piperacillin tazobactam. And the patient was passing urine. There was no need of RRT as of the nephrologist, which we took the opinion of. Next. So this patient kept on having progressive dyspnea with progressive tachypnea and desaturation, even on non-invasive ventilation. And within 48 hours, we had to invasively ventilate this patient. I'm sorry, within 24 hours, we had to invasively ventilate this patient due to, clear-cut non-responsive trial of non-invasive ventilation. I'm not discussing ABGs here for the sake of time. It's understood that we have taken a serious. As I said, we took opinion of cardiologist and the nephrologist. Next. And coming to
can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. The thing is that, as I said, that we had seen some cavitations in the lung. My take is that in a pneumonia acutely, if you find cavitations, you think of two things. One is definitely MSSA, Staphylococcus here, maybe MSSA, and also maybe Klebsiella.
Yes.
So the coverage you had given, did you think of covering MSSA? I mean, separately. Clarithromycin will have some effect on MSSA, but not very strong effect, I guess.
Yeah, I think I suppose piperacillin would cover MSSA reasonably. Hello?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So are you okay with piperacillin as a coverage for MSSA? I mean, I was not sure. I just continued with clarithromycin and piperacillin tazobactam. So
what we practice here, if we suspect MSSA, basically many of the drugs they have got actions against MSSA, but very few have got good actions against MSSA. Problem of MSS is not resistance, but problem is virulence. I mean, unless
Right.
you give a strong drug, it may, in spite of being drug insensitive, the patient may worsen. So we use either we have got this flucloxacin, or we use also cefazolin. That's what we use.
Okay. Okay. No, I did not change the antibiotic. I take your point on that.
No, no problem.
And,
I'm just asking. I'm just telling you a different viewpoint. It's not that
Yeah,
you follow.
yeah,
Okay.
I got it. And going back to Dr. Ranveer's answer, and this is the echo report, and it showed an abnormal systolic anterior leaflet motion of the mitral wall with LV hypertrophy and left atrial enlargement. So with minimal septal hypertrophy, mind you, this patient had undergone septal myomectomy, which is, I think, when we interacted with the cardiologist, that is the procedure of choice for HOCMs. But in spite of that, there were features still which were suggestive of HOCM, along with mitral regurgitation with LV ejection fraction of 30%. There were no vegetations with minimal pericardial effusion. So Dr. Tyagi, this was an echo report. So if you have any comment on this.
No, go ahead.
Right. Next. So this was the X-ray, and as you could see, this was the X-ray after the ventilation, and I just wanted you to appreciate the the progression of the shadows, which are clearly like full-blown ARDS, and there's hardly the right side pneumonia which we could see is still visible as a dense opacity, but the obvious shadows on the left side. Next. So naturally, we actually initiated the standard prone positioning ventilation, since this patient was remaining significantly hypoxic, with the help of the ARDS net protocol with recruitment manuals and the paralytic agents whenever required. Next. So this patient kept on worsening, and eventually this patient had shock with noradrenaline, and we shifted him empirically to vancomycin and meropenem, again thinking in terms of whether this could be an MRSA. And at this point in time, we obviously shifted this patient's antibiotics as an empiric antibiotic. So the art of the science of how to shift or introduce the empiric antibiotics is an age-old kind of thing which we are doing. And eventually this patient underwent renal replacement therapy. So the cultures we send, in fact, we did a bronchoscopy, which I will come to, and we sent the blood cultures, and I will discuss the cultures. But anyone has any comment about the empiric selection of the antibiotics for this case?
Pradeep?
Why you use vancomycin? Can you use teicoplanin, or vancomycin is lower tissue penetration, especially you are using vancomycin in this condition?
Yeah, I agree with your question. We thought that let us consider this as MRSA, since there were cavitations. So staph are known to cause such kind of cavities, and although it was not very classical, I thought of using vancomycin over teicoplanin for this reason. So combination, or you would have done something differently? I don't know.
Yeah.
Any comments, Pradeep?
Pradeep,
On what day was this antibiotics changed, Shrikant?
This was between day 4 and day 5.
Okay, so I mean, so unless you were strongly suspecting there is a VAP that is set in, so
I'm not sure.
I mean, it depends on what your clinical scenario would have been. Otherwise, I would, for me, if there has not been a suspicion of VAP, I mean, if it does not fulfill the criteria of VAP at that stage, I would have just looked at it as a ARDS with worsening whatever shock, and I may not have changed, but it all depends on what you found at day 4, day 5. If you found a new fever spike, copious secretions, and definitely I see worsening infiltrates. If there has been a worsening gas exchange, and you got some
Yes.
bug which tells you there is a ventilatory associated
Yes.
happening, then I would
Yes.
justify your change. Maybe
Yeah.
you will be in a better position to give me a little more details whether
Yeah.
that was the case, Srikanth.
Yes, you are perfectly correct. I think, we are looking at this case at between day 4 to day 5. And as I told you that this patient got ventilated within 24 hours. So this was already about 72 to 96 hours after the initial invasive ventilation. And the deterioration was obviously in the form of fever, which was obviously there, with new shock, which was not there. So we assumed that this was VAP, and we actually did a bronchoscopy and a blood culture. But this was, as you correctly said, this was assuming a VAP and the change of antibiotics, of course, with a shock which came in.
Okay, then it's fine. I think it's absolutely justified. I'm okay with it.
Okay. Next slide, please. So we did a bronchoscopy, and the reports after the bronchoscopy, which was done with which the report came as MRSA and Pseudomonas aeruginosa from the BAL. This was within 24 about 36 hours of doing the bronchoscopy. Next. Can I get a next slide, please? Yeah. So these were the organisms, and then we thought that this was probably a good combination. Although I'm not very sure whether I should have added one more antibiotic as a gram negative along with meropenem. I'm not sure. Eventually, as I said, this patient already had renal replacement therapy for oliguria and anuria eventually. This patient, as I said, underwent RRT with ultrafiltration. And since a nephrologist wanted the urine analysis, we did the urine, and we showed 3+ RBCs and 2+ proteins. So there's a twist in the case, and as you could see that there were 3 major or maybe 4 major problems which we were encountering for managing this case. We had to face a 5th significant problem in the form of, so he labeled this patient as a case of glomerulonephritis with sonography showing echogenic kidneys without any hydronephrosis. So the nephrologist was of the opinion that under the cover of antibiotics, he wanted to give methylprednisolone. So we gave that, and the blood culture by the time when we had sent, it was consistent with which was grown on the BAL. So with increasing vasopressor support, we had to introduce vasopressin, and at this point, this was about day 7 of the illness, where we added polymyxin B along with the Marix cocktail, and of course anidulafungin, which was added on day 8. Which was like empirical without any growth of candida. So here it was, a twist in the case, which was like coming to, a surprise to all of us about the kidney deterioration. So along the same continuum, we sent his ANA, which was positive, the cryoglobulins and the antibodies to rule out the good pastures, which was actually not there. The C3 and C4 were normal. Urine for Ben-Jones proteins were normal. Protein electrophoresis was normal. But the PNCA was very strongly positive. And on the basis of that, we started the patient on cyclophosphamide. So there were the problems that we were facing, the sepsis, which was very clear. Of course, there was no infective endocarditis because there's a strong association of HOCMs and the valvular dysfunction along with infective endocarditis as far as the cardiology was concerned. But then these were adequate deteriorations for the patient and for us to have challenges on daily basis. Next. So for the same, we actually did his plasmapheresis, a total of 7 cycles. and we gave him rituximab for the 2 doses. In between, of course, methylprednisolone was stopped, and the urine culture on eventually on day 14 gave Enterobacteriaceae, which was sensitive to cefepime. So cefepime was added on the top of vancomycin, meropenem, polymyxin B, and cefepime along with anodilafungin. I think it was kind of polytherapy, but we actually continued that. The ARDS kept on worsening, as was the shock. We did the bronchoscopy the second time with a deterioration where the ARDS had deteriorated on day 14. We did a bronchoscopy again, which grew Acinetobacter and Candida albicans. And during the same time, before the BAL came, we have added minocycline, since our, the local antimicrobials support minocycline for Acinetobacters. So I don't know how is it in your cases elsewhere in the hospitals which you work. So this was the X-ray, and as you could see, this is whitened out, and we thought that this is probably the result of his primary respiratory pathology plus the cardiac pathology plus the renal pathology, and plus of course the ARDS related to the sepsis. Next.
I'm just, can I interrupt once?
Yeah.
I am just wondering, how do you manage the fluids in this, or rather the volume overload status in these patients? One who has got a renal failure, likely to be oliguric, already a known heart failure, and possibly
Yes,
also ARDS.
Yes,
So
sir.
do you have any markers that by what we go?
Sir, a very good and very difficult question. Although I did not mention the details of the other supportive management, but the fluid management in this case was very challenging. Since, but by and large, we kept this patient on a negative, like a drier side. Eventually, what we thought that after the second deterioration, that is day 7, day 8, eventually I don't remember him giving a lot of fluids. In fact, they were stopped, and we kept on giving him nasogastric feeding. So fluids were actually not administered after day 7 for this patient.
Do you measure, I mean, use any markers, echo markers or something to check whether they're volume overloaded or not?
Yeah, so we usually see the IVCs, and they were all the time the IVCs which was full, which was probably concurring with the fluid overload status for this patient. I don't know, I would have done something different or something else apart from only seeing the IVC, but.
What does Dr. Tyagi say?
We are seeing regularly IVC. We are for fluid. We are regularly saying IVC of the patient. How much IVC? More than 50% collapse or not? What is the diameters? So
yeah, we did not repeat the echo as well. We just kept on seeing the IVC.
Yeah. Just whenever a patient in prone, that these 16 hours we don't see IVC. Otherwise, we see the IVC.
Yeah. So
Pradeep, any comments on this?
Yeah, like Shushruti is telling, I think this is a patient where heart failure seems to be there predominantly with a low LV of 30% with AR, aortic regurgitation, and AF. See, all these three components would keep pushing him intermittently into heart failure. So I think dynamic cardiac assessments with advanced dynamic hemodynamic measures would be a very valuable tool in optimizing his fluid balance. So simple lung ultrasound to look for B lines and keeping him dry even metabolically with whatever measures, and a small whiff of dobutamine also wouldn't do him harm to sort of vasodilate him a little bit and reduce the afterload. I think Shushruti is showing.
One problem, Pradeep, if we use dobutamine in this patient, we have not measured the LVOT gradient dynamic.
Yeah.
It may actually worsening, considering that he has got still a SAM,
Yes.
So he might be actually having some amount of dynamic obstruction.
Yeah.
Still.
Rightly said. Like I said, I would do multiple repeat echocardiograms to assess his gradients and his advanced hemodynamics, and obviously decide on these cardiac measures. So optimizing myocardial function or cardiac optimization definitely has to happen in tandem, which I'm sure Srikanth would have definitely done it. So considering that it's all done, so we'll focus more on antimicrobial management, isn't it, Sushruth? I think that would be the way to look at
Perfect.
it.
Another small question, if I may intervene. That is, you are also treating the patients in line of a primary glomerulonephritis, right? Like you've
Yeah.
got a P-ANCA positive and you've got a, I think, what else did you get?
The P-ANCA was strongly positive.
Positive, and for that you have put the patient on cyclophosphamide, and then you have done a plasmapheresis.
Yeah.
But just one P-ANCA without C-ANCA, would that make a big difference in this scenario? I mean, P-ANCA might be even,
Yeah. So, sir, the present.
Your
so the
idea would be that the patient actually had a glomerulonephritis previously and then went on to developing a pneumonia, and so both were present together. Otherwise, these are diseases quite apart. I mean, you've got a pneumonia, you've got a glomerulonephritis.
Right, sir. So it's I think another very excellent practical and clinical question, because this is what we were discussing on the admission. This thing, it was a retrospective discussion, since when we saw the urine, as you could see that I have mentioned the urine report on day 7, day 8, where we just thought that the initial creatinine, which was presented as 4.5, and the current the current understanding among them is either P-ANCA or a C-ANCA positive. So they label it as ANCA associated vasculitis, and they treat the patient with plasmapheresis. So our nephrologist feels that either it is P-ANCA or a C-ANCA. Ultimately, the treatment is plasmapheresis and kidney biopsy later on. But there was no time for this patient to do that.
Right.
Was complements low, Srikanth? Was complement level
Normal. C3, C4 were normal.
Normal, that's the idea. They're not good.
So that probably goes against active disease, isn't it, Sushruth? What do you think?
Yeah, that's what I'm telling. That the picture was basically,
Yeah.
it could have been. I'm not arguing at all that it could not have been, but then
You are right. That's what we actually thought, that whether as Dr. the Sushruth is correctly saying, whether this was as a kidney admission rather than lung admission was the basic issue. And the second thing was, in HOCMs you don't find LV ejection fractions which are as low as 30%. They have a reasonably preserved LV ejection fraction. So with the LVEF of 30%, we were more carried away with the sepsis and the pneumonia rather than the renal failure. I don't know.
so we'll go ahead, I guess.
So ultimately, this patient kept on deteriorating and died on day 23 of the admission. And as the discussion has already occurred, that what else we could have thought, and the thought process probably. So the objective of presenting this case was manifold. One of them was any alternative antimicrobials. I have not used arbicacin in this patient. I don't know whether this fits into the context of the present case. That was number one. Number two was whether primary labeling of the case, whether it was, as Dr. Sushruth and Dr. Pradeep correctly pointed out, that could this be as a kidney deterioration as a case rather than a pneumonia. Of course, there was overlap, and this was a clear-cut overlap, since we could see that the X-ray was normal 2 months back, which was done for some other reason. So it was very clear that the deterioration happened due to pneumonia, but because of underlying maybe the renal condition, which was not picked up by us also for initial couple of days, and of course the heart killed the patient. So,
I'll
if
ask
any
the
comments.
questions once more. Ranveer asked initially, what was the initial blood gas? What was the best deficit? Was there any
Yeah, sir. I did not. There were so many blood gases because this patient stayed with. Yeah. So the first blood gas was a clear-cut hypoxia with compensated respiratory acidosis. It was around 50-55 PCO2 with bicarbs of some 25-28. So
no best deficit?
Sorry.
No best deficit.
There was no best deficit. If you consider, if you obviously consider the COPD component and the kidney component, as you are asking, there was no best deficit for us, and the pH was okay. pH was
You can tell that if the patient comes with a creatinine so high without a best deficit, then the patient is chronic renal failure.
Right. Right. That's what. Absolutely correct.
Yeah. One thing is that. Second thing is that when you put on the invasive ventilation, if patient is not improving on NIV after 2, 4, 6 hours, when you put on ventilator, invasive ventilator, after normally if you are 2 or 4 hour patient, PF rate not improve, or then think maybe this type of patient immediately go for the. But
I take that point.
One thing is not improving in this patient, ARDS is not improving. Initially, you put on the antibiotic, patient output is improving.
Yes.
That is good thing. Later on, the ARDS part is deteriorating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I agree.
Yeah.
Anything, Pradeep, if you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will just try to go to the question of arbicacin, since that was the topic that was there on the background. Whether use of arbicacin would have made any difference. I think you put him on appropriate antibiotics for VAP cover, from whatever I recognize, Shrikant, because he grew Pseudomonas and MRSA, and you had a good cover for both of them. And I'm sure you would have seen the sensitivity later. If the meropenem that you started, it was sensitive, then that was a good combination. Arbicacin, because of its nephrotoxicity in this situation, and if you look at all the data that has come out, I think it has been found to be definitely superior to conventional aminoglycosides like amikacin and tobramycin with regards to MIC levels. But about its clinical efficacy in this situation, we need probably a little more bigger data, although there are a lot of reports about its effectiveness in Acinetobacter and Pseudomonas and in Enterobacteriaceae species. So trying to pick this new kid on the block vis-a-vis meropenem, I would have been little hesitant. So Shushruth, your thoughts and Ranveer's thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely.
I'll ask Dr. Tyagi to comment first.
No, I am also agree with Pradeep, because initially if you are patient coming in the community, everyone think about this. So macrolides one is using, and the piperacin tazobactam usually, this is the protocol most of the ICU using. Patient is already in the ARF, kidney failure, no base deficit, creatinine high. So definitely we not first go with the arbicacin, we go with the piperacin tazobactam. One thing is important, because multi-organ failure patient coming in the ICU or hypoxic, I think immediately intubate within 2-3 hours. And second, my choice is a little higher than the piperacillin tazobactam in these patients, because we don't have a time to give these type of patients. Wait for this. Okay, empirically, you start hit early, hit hard. That is which protocol I feel in these type of patients. If patient is symptomatic, slight symptomatic, that is, this patient is so many comorbid conditions. I think except diabetes, all comorbid conditions there.
I fully agree. I would have preferred a penem initially, definitely.
Because this type of patient, we don't have a time. We don't wait. Hit whatever we have the best resource use, then we de-escalate. This is what.
And in our hospital, we definitely give a MSSA coverage in these patients. We use, as I've told you, we use a flucloxacillin or we use a cefazolin if we feel it's an MSSA initially.
But Sushruth, this patient came as MRSA, Sushruth.
No, that came after some days, 7 days or so. The patient could have been jolly well be an MSSA and then gone into. Right now, we are using, if we feel that it could be an MRSA, we are using a new drug that has come in the market. We are using ceftaroline. Ceftaroline will have excellent coverage against MRSA. It is reasonably renal friendly, good penetration in lungs, and we are using that. But we have also used teicoplanin. No problem, teicoplanin. We use linezolid. That's not a problem. We can use that. Vancomycin, we don't prefer in pneumonias. Otherwise, vancomycin is also okay.
Yeah.
So I think what I can emphasize with, since the topic has been, we spoke about this new kid on the block, it has a good lung penetration because the studies have shown that the bronchial presence of this drug has been shown to be very good. So which means this is a drug one could keep in mind if you have to use it as an adjunct drug with any other drug for hitting the lungs. So that is one aspect we could keep in mind.
And
So I had to,
Srikanth, second thing which I prefer sometime, kidney you can revive. That is not a problem. So if you have with the drug is the nephrotoxic, don't worry about that. First, because kidney the organ you can revive that. But other organ like ARDS, that are very difficult to revive.
Right. So just two things I think finally I had to say. One was I thought, since looking at the coverage of arbicacin as such, where it has a good coverage against MRSA and most of the drug-resistant gram-negatives, namely the MDRs gram-negative like Pseudomonas or Acinetobacter or even Enterobacteriaceae. And when I look back in this patient, I had actually all 4 of them. So I thought maybe just at the point of discussion that arbicacin would have fit into the slot somewhere down the line, as Dr. Tyagi correctly said, that we may not actually look at the nephrotoxicity at one point of time. And second thing which I actually want to ask the panelist as well as Dr. Sushruth, comment on minocycline, whether how is your local microbiological data supporting the use of minocycline for Acinetobacter?
If it is sensitive, it's fine. I mean, so there are, some of them, it's not very sensitive in our hospital. It's not that all resistant Acinetobacters are sensitive to minocycline. But I'd say about 50%, 60% they are sensitive. If it is sensitive, it is better than tigecycline because it has got a better blood level. So we would prefer that if it is sensitive over tigecycline.
Yeah. And second thing, I think minocycline is a bacteriostatic drug.
Yeah, that is there.
So in these type of patient, you need Sidal because we don't have a time of these type of patients.
They had already been using polymyxin B prior to this.
Polymyxin. Yeah, that is good choice.
So next, can you just click? So I'm sure with all our efforts and everyone together, we would definitely say go Corona and it will go and we will win over it.
It was a great fight. Whatever might be the results, they are not in our hands. But you fought well with this patient.
Okay. Yeah, I think this patient was atrociously sick. He had a lot of problems.
So many.
There was nothing going in favor of this guy. What do you guys think?
Yeah, definitely sure.
So,
otherwise, he is improving.
Yeah. I think just a few comments on arbicacin, just because we are speaking about this new molecule. Yeah. I think the role where I have used Srikanth and Sushruth and Tyagi, see, arbicacin, I distinctly feel it has some role in skin and soft tissue infection. The reason why I say that is, when you get a patient with, say, necrotizing fasciitis or cellulitis who is moderately sick, so you may have to throw in, vancomycin along with, high-end antibiotics like piperacillin, tazobactam, or meropenem for that matter, depending on how sick the patient is and how frequently has been visiting hospital. So do we think that there is some scope for this drug? The reason being, one drug will solve all your problems, that it will cover MRSA and it does have a good cover on other gram-negative infections, rather than throwing 2-3 antibiotics in such situations. That is one scenario I can see where this drug may have a role. The second situation, Srikanth, where I feel is in intra-abdominal infections where you have an issue with Enterococcus fecalis, like gallbladder sepsis. So there also where you may have to tackle ESBL E. coli along with Enterococcus. do we see there is some role for this drug? So these are the two distinct situations where I have used, and clinical outcomes have been good with these, and I have used it as a de-escalation also in some of the patients. So what has been your experience, all three panelists?
I have used it in almost 8 patients with this 10 toxic epidermal necrolysis, where the choice of antibiotics become quite narrow. I cannot use most of them because it may worsen 10. Choice remains between a carbapenem and a aminoglycoside. I try to avoid the carbapenem in the beginning so that I don't get carbapenem resistance to Ensaftrine because they need a prolonged treatment sometimes. So I treated very bad 10s with arbicacin successfully, almost 8 patients.
So they did well, Sushruth?
Yeah.
The
Okay.
biggest,
Yeah, even we had a good outcome clinically for these moderate SSIs and these intra-abdominal infections. So we need to gain more confidence by having a bigger data and convincing ourselves that we can pick it up as a first choice. Srikanth and all the panelists.
yeah, I fully agree, with Pradeep. One most important advantage of this drug this is the concentration dependent drug. So you can use single dose. You can advise in home care also. Nursing staff go and give the home care 130 to 40 minutes injection one time a day. So this is the biggest advantage. Burden of healthcare, burden of money expenditure, all this is. So this drug have a biggest advantage, single time and all coverage.
Okay, fine. I think Dr. Sushruth has any final comment if you
No, it's
want to.
fine.
make.
Srikanth, before we wind off, Srikanth, I need to upload your tabla skills because we really enjoyed your musical bonanza on the Facebook. I don't know if Ranveer and
Thank you
Sushruth
very
saw
much.
that
I
beautiful
saw.
video.
Thank you very much for all of you for liking and listening to that.
I think we need your performance in ISCCM stage, Ranveer Saab.
Yeah,
100%.
in Ahmedabad.
Yes, 100%.
This year onward, we are planning IACCM cultural night.
100% I am there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Chirag, will you take this, take the forum and conclude?
Sorry?
No, Dr. Chirag, I'm talking Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Chirag,
Yes, yes.
yeah, can you just conclude this?
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Srikanth, and it was very intriguing discussion around the case, a mixed case, I would say, pneumonia as well as kidney involvement. And thank you, Dr. Pradeep, to take up with the Arbicacin opinion from every intensivist on the all part of India. So it was a good insights which we gathered. Also regarding the concentration dependent point at the last lead discussed. Thank you so much to all the faculties, Dr. Sushruth, Dr. Ranveer Tyagi, Dr. Srikanth, and Dr. Pradeep. It was very intense meeting and a good take home and good insights for us as an house of Arbicacin as well. I like the message what Srikanth that we said. So I may take a liberty to quote the same message that go Corona go.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ranveer. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Srikanth, thanks,
Thank
Sushruth.
you.
Thanks, Sandeep.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just before concluding this session, thanks a lot to all of you. I have one question from the perspective of Arbicacin. If I am allowed, I can ask this question.
Yes.
So in this recent trend of COVID-19, there are a lot of patients are coming with ARDS, SARI, and pneumonia. So do you feel there is a possibility of using Arbicacin, or whether Arbicacin can be a drug to be used in this?
The role of Arbicacin, as we understand, am I audible?
Now you're audible.
Yeah, the role of Arbicacin, as already described by Pradeep, is that right now we are comfortable in using Arbicacin mostly in skin and soft tissue infection, serious skin and soft tissue infection, possibly with MRSA, with gram positives as well as gram negatives. It would be a good drug. And also intra-abdominal infections. Aminoglycosides as a first-line therapy in pneumonia right now, people don't use much. I'm not telling that they should not or they cannot, they definitely can, but I would be probably needing more data. If it is typically a certain type of resistant germs, maybe MRSA, or maybe some of these multi-drug resistant gram negatives, where we are going beyond the first-line drugs or second-line drugs, their arbitration may be definitely a choice. But as an empiric therapy in all SARI, I don't know, I'm not very sure. Pradeep or Ranveer, would you like to comment?
We can use in these patients who have pneumonia with high PCT. That is very important because in COVID is no need of antibiotic if PCT is normal, CRP are already high. But if high PCT, then we can use as a single dose to avoid other unnecessary so many antibiotics together. Single dose we can use if PCT is high. That means secondary infection in COVID patient, secondary bacterial infection.
Yeah. I'm talking about the secondary infection only. Obviously, it's not an antiviral. So this is not.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dr. Tyagi that I think it has advantage as a major advantage of coverage of MRSA along with the multi-drug resistant gram negative. I think I will definitely put that point on the forefront, because if they get secondarily infected, as Dr. Tyagi as well as Dr. Sushruth said, then we have advantage of once a day dose and coverage and the broader coverage with one antibiotic, especially if there's high PCT and suspicion of secondary bacterial pneumonia on the top of a viral pneumonia.
Thank you, Dr. Srikanth. Dr. Pradeep, you have any views in this?
I think Dr. Pradeep is disconnected. So I think he's left.
Okay. Binay, is there any question from the audience?
Yes, sir. There are a few questions.
So I'll request the panelists and moderator and panelists to see that question if that can be answered. One or two questions.
Yeah, we're available. They can ask questions.
No, it is there in the chat box. Binay, can you just read the question?
Yes, sir. Any role in UTI VRLRE?
LRERE?
Any role in UTI?
UTI, definitely yes.
Yeah.
Definitely yes. It's an aminoglycoside. It should be a good drug for UTI. And if you have got typical organisms, and it has got quite a broad spectrum, I think you have not used much, but then it can be a very good drug in UTI, definitely.
Yeah.
And the other question is, would you consider IVLG rather than plasmapheresis?
IVIG.
Yeah. So it is always been a little debate about IVIG and plasmapheresis, but as we know that the better clearance of this immune status of these patients who have ANCA, it has been very clear that plasmapheresis would be definitely first choice, and if you are not able to do that, then of course go with IVIG.
And another question is, at what stage should we consider arbicacin?
Already we have discussed it, I guess, that it is not a first-line drug unless you have got reasons to believe that the patient was in hospital previously and we would be having multi-drug resistant germs. But it is definitely a second-line therapy when we are thinking that the patient might be infected by an MRSA or a MDR gram-negative organism. There it is definitely becomes. I and Pradeep, I think our experiences are mostly with skin and soft tissue infections, and Pradeep has got also an serious intra-abdominal infections. And I think, as already pointed out, urinary tract infections can be a good choice. So here, this drug can be definitely used if you are suspecting the patient is having gram-negative, resistant germs, gram-positive as well as gram-negative.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sushruth Bandyopadhyay, Dr. Srikanth, and Dr. Ranveer Tyagi. I believe Dr. Pradeep is also there, or? He's left.
Left, sir.
Okay. Dr. Akhilesh, thanks a lot for sparing your time. And thanks all the audience and all the delegates who have attended this. We will come back to you very soon with our CritiQuest 4, Series 4, which will be another interesting subject in the intensive care. Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Sandeep.
Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Sandeep.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank
you, everyone.
Dr. Sir, bye.
Bye, friends.
Thank Dr.
Thank you.
Akhilesh,
Thank you all.
Dr.
Thank you.
Chirag. Thank you very much.
Thank
Nice
you.
to
Thank you,
talk
those
to you all.
gentlemen.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Have a nice evening to all.